Hey, howdy, hi, I'm Zombie Brian. Welcome back to another video. This is going to be a reoccurring series throughout the entire year, once every month, because this is... At the end of every month, I'm going to post this video showing you exactly how many and which movies I watched for the entire month. I started this experiment last year, but I didn't really keep up with it, but I'm going to this time. This series is a product of just this experiment that I've been trying to do of just seeing how many movies I can watch in an entire year. My goal for this year is 1,000 movies, and I guarantee you I'm going to break that record. Last year, I only got up to, I think it was 760-something movies. Didn't get very close, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. And also something more annoying, for this month of January, I watched one movie less than I did last January. Son of a bitch, I'm lacking, but it's fine. We have time to catch up. But anyway, that's pretty much what this entire series is going to be. One video a month where I just quickly review every single movie I watched for that month. It should be interesting to see how many movies I watch for the month, but also detect the patterns of what I'm into at that moment. You know, there could be like a chunk of westerns that I watch, and all of a sudden I switched up to like a noir film or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's very interesting to see this, the psychology of it all. Anyway, that's enough chatter. Let's get into the video, shall we? Cat Run 2, directed by John Stockwell. A subpar sequel to a decent action comedy with a really stupid Iron Man ripoff. More boobs and laughter, but less shocking violence. Hard pass. Black Mask, directed by Daniel Lee. A weirdly entertaining action flick with a style reminiscent of Sam Raimi. Poorly dubbed and offensively choppy editing, but it has exciting, goofy wire work mixed with tasty violence. I enjoyed it. Career Opportunities, directed by Brian Gordon. A forgotten John Hughes gem starring a forgotten comedic actor. The golden concept of Home Alone in a department store was ruined, but it had a banging soundtrack, John Hughes-isms, and Jennifer Connelly, so it's okay in my book. The Longest Day, directed by Ken Anakin, Andrew Martin, and Bernhard Wicki. A star-studded cast is sprinkled generously around a hellishly long movie with a dreadfully slow start to what would become the greatest depiction of the most important day of World War II. Phenomenal film. Collateral Damage, directed by Andrew Davis. Despite Arnold being back in the jungle for more cookie-cutter action, there are no predators and he doesn't even pick up a gun. Absolutely ludicrous directing choice. Saved, directed by Brian Dannelly. A teen rom-com that hilariously pokes some lighthearted fun at the Christian faith without truly offending anyone. I loved it. Back to Bataan, directed by Edward Dmytryk. A very specific forgotten moment in World War II. Has very effective battle sequences, explosions that I actually felt, but I'm not too familiar with the Pacific side of the war. But it was a decent movie. Elizabethtown, directed by Cameron Crowe. Suicide was the plan, falling in love was the outcome. An unconventional approach to the mystery of true love, and it worked out beautifully. Definitely the best movie I've seen this year so far. All Cheerleaders Die, directed by Lucky McKee. Good golly gee, Lucky McKee never disappoints me. A fun and unique take on zombies with a pinch of dark fantasy that works perfectly smooth alongside a raunchy teen comedy. I really liked this movie. The Great War, directed by Stephen Luke. A hilarious, almost offensively obvious scene-for-scene ripoff of Saving Private Ryan. I understand budgetary restrictions, but if you can afford Ron Perlman and Billy Zane for your movie, you can afford to make a better movie. The Dirty Dozen, directed by Robert Aldrich. A star-studded cast populates this needlessly long off-brand World War II movie before two-thirds of them were murdered within the last 10 minutes. For a war film from the 60s, it was decent though, but I don't know if I'd watch it again anytime soon. The Beach, directed by Danny Boyle. A straightforward concept that diverges into a surreal nightmare. While the idea of it intrigued me, the execution missed the mark considerably. The outcome made the whole movie seem pointless. Adaptation, directed by Spike Jonze. A meta-story about a guy trying to write about a woman who's trying to write about another guy who likes flowers. Though this movie is much more than that. Too much to actually explain right now, so I'll just say I loved it. Heart's War, directed by Gregory Hoblit. A disheartening movie that starts with death and ends with sacrifice. World War II in a nutshell, am I right? I just focused on hoping Terrence Howard made it out alive so he'd see his son again. And he did, so mission accomplished. Decent movie. Niagara, directed by Henry Hathaway. A thriller that sees Marilyn Monroe play the villain for the first and only time in her entire career. Jean Peters attempts to steal the show though, and she actually succeeds in doing so in the third act. Anyhow, this is my favorite Marilyn movie. Saltburn, directed by Emerald Fennell. A horrifying peek into the mind of a sociopath with disturbing and awkward moments galore. Was I expecting to see Barry Keoghan's penis? Absolutely. It made me feel gross though. So I love it. As Young as You Feel, directed by Harmon Jones. An early Marilyn film where she's not even the main character. Not that that detracted from the movie, but the subject matter just didn't interest me at all. It was just a movie that I watched. That's it. Carriers, directed by David and Alex Pastor. A movie made 15 years ago gives us a hilariously accurate account of how we all thought the coronavirus was going to play out. But the movie tried to cram in together a TV season's worth of story, and it didn't work out at all. Calendar Girl, directed by John Weitzel. A movie about the archetypal male Marilyn Monroe fan. A bunch of fucking heathens desperately try to meet Marilyn, and in doing so, become obnoxious losers who don't deserve her company. I'm sorry. I've brought too much reality into a simple, lighthearted comedy. Whoops. The Dentist, directed by Brian Yuzna. The promise of this movie was technically delivered, but somehow I feel it fell short. The gruesomely realistic props and effects were top-notch, but I felt like the dentist himself was kind of a throwaway character in his own movie. It was entertaining though, so that's good enough. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, directed by Howard Hawks. The quintessential Marilyn movie. It has iconic musical numbers and is genuinely funny at times. Jane Russell almost surpasses the Queen herself though with her performance. Absolutely fabulous film. The Adventures of Pinocchio, directed by Steve Barron. I remember watching the VHS as a kid. In fact, I literally still have it, and I remember liking it. But now, no thank you. Goodbye. How to Marry a Millionaire, directed by Gene Negulesco. I butchered that name, I'm sorry. One of the very few Marilyn movies I hadn't seen before. The Queen herself, Lauren Bacall and Betty Grable. I mean, Jesus, there was barely any room on screen for them at the same time. Fantastic film. Napoleon, directed by Ridley Scott. Another epic from the master of large-scale history, although not as epic and as large as I imagined it would be. Stanley Kubrick probably could have done it, and he meant to do so, but nobody believed in him. Ridley Scott tried, and as far as I'm concerned, this will be the best attempt we'll ever get. River of No Return, directed by Otto Preminger. Even though neither Marilyn nor the director wanted to make this movie, it turned out pretty good. It's not your typical 50s Western with sweeping landscapes and gunfights at high noon. It's still fantastic, though. Bridget Jones's Diary, directed by Sharon Maguire. A feisty little rom-com with actual laugh-out-loud moments, like the decision to make it a British story. That was weird. It was also a little light on the whole diary aspect too, but it was funny, so that's okay. Suicide Kings, directed by Peter O'Fallon. A whodunit involving the mob. Pretty great ensemble cast, enjoyable storytelling and pacing. Shockingly, I figured out the twist end before it happened, but that didn't ruin my experience though. My Week with Marilyn, directed by Simon Curtis. A brutal look at Marilyn during the most grueling transitional period of her life. Michelle Williams doesn't really look or sound like her, but she captures the essence perfectly. That's why it's a perfect movie. Go, directed by Doug Liman. A fun, quirky story told 3 times from 3 different perspectives. Smart, funny, and has a stellar cast with a random early Melissa McCarthy cameo. The story is a standard drug bust gone wrong, but the twists and turns will keep you going. The Butterfly Effect 2, directed by John R. Leonetti. A movie that takes all the stuff that made the first one amazing and good and replaces it with massive piles of cow shit. What a fucking disaster this movie was. Dream Scenario, directed by Christopher Borgli. A movie that borderline fucked my sensory system. Nicolas Cage finally blends into a role where I can't identify him. The editing and scene blocking were expertly and geniusly crafted to make it feel like you were in a dream. This was a phenomenal film. Sly, directed by Tom Zimney. A weirdly profound look at the man who is most known for giving Arnold Schwarzenegger a run for his money, though I never expected to watch a documentary about Stallone and be left wanting to hear more, but somehow I felt like the whole thing was too small of a presentation. Onibaba, directed by Kanato Shindo. A really weird drama that turns into a psychological nightmare. It was atmospheric and very claustrophobic, being forced to watch this odd romance develop, and then you learn in graphic detail why envy is considered a sin. This was an exceptional film that I will absolutely watch again. Self-Reliance, directed by Jake Johnson. A what-if scenario that plays out not quite like you expect. Had an intriguing story that could have been a little bit more action-oriented and more violent, but nevertheless, this is the first good movie of 2024. Nashville, directed by Robert Altman, an early people-watching simulator that takes place in the South. The amount of characters kind of ruins Altman's signature overlapping dialogue, though. This movie is really just an excuse to experience the South in the 70s, and it's wonderful. Bound, directed by the Wachowskis. A fuck-around-and-find-out movie with beautiful cinematography and carefully planned-out plot points. The simplicity of the story and the minimal locations made for an easy-to-enjoy movie all around, and we all love Jennifer Tilly, right? Fracture, directed by Gregory Hoblit. A courtroom thriller about a killer who's openly cocky and actually does get away with it. Anthony Hopkins does a more subdued impression of Hannibal Lecter, and it's perfect. I wish the ending would have been a little bit more final than it was, but overall, it was a decent movie. Stray Dog, directed by Akira Kurosawa. A basic cat-and-mouse detective story, but the camera work is really what makes it special. Kurosawa was doing stuff before anyone else was, which is why he's the most influential filmmaker of all time. I don't think this film is in the top 10 best Kurosawa works, but it is still very well done. Spring Break Massacre, directed by Michael Hoffman Jr. The title says it all. By all accounts, this is a terrible movie, but when it comes to all cheap, low-grade B horror movies from no-name directors, this one isn't the worst. And believe me, that's a compliment. Ivan's Childhood, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. The first film from one of the greatest directors to ever exist. This isn't your standard World War II film. If I have to compare it to anything, I'd say it's a lighter version of Come and See. This film is the gateway to Tarkovsky's famous visual poems he would make later on. Absolute perfection. Drunken Angel, directed by Akira Kurosawa. This is a shallow subject for a Kurosawa film, but it's done with his expert cinematic language on display. The signature Kurosawa camera work is almost non-existent though. Maybe he was in the middle of developing his style at that point. I enjoyed it very much though, but I know that there's better offerings from this legendary director. Hollywood Homicide, directed by Ron Shelton. A funny buddy cop movie reminiscent of the classic 40s noir films, but with a good balance of comedy and action. It also has perhaps the most entertaining police chase I've ever seen in a movie. This is a top-notch movie. Loved it. Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese. A brilliant and beautiful portrayal of a tragedy that up to this point I'd wager no one cared about, which is the point of the movie. Lily and Leo gave magnificent performances in this hard-hitting wake-up call to not forget the past. However, I don't think it needed to be 3.5 hours long. The Father, directed by Florian Zeller. A disturbingly realistic depiction of Alzheimer's. Having dealt with it myself, it is a hard movie to watch, but it is done brilliantly. The scattered nature of it made you feel like you were the one with dementia. This is now the best movie I've seen this year so far. Superstition, directed by James W. Robertson. A standard cheesy 80s haunted house movie with above-average effects and fun characters. There's not much to say about this movie. I would call it a hidden gem, but I'm not quite sold on the authenticity of its charm yet. It was worth at least one viewing, though. Night Swim, directed by Bryce McGuire. A standard lightly salted horror movie with an intriguing monster that will probably be forgotten within 3 years. It wasn't absolutely terrible, but it wasn't mind-blowingly great either. I probably won't come back to it. Dementia 13, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. A borderline pointless story that practically went nowhere. I watched it just out of curiosity to see where one of the big names had started from. This was a rocky start for Coppola. Hatari, directed by Howard Hawks. Although I was not a fan of the entire point of the movie, capturing animals and putting them in zoos, I will say it was an exciting movie. It was well-paced, and the chase scenes, regardless of the context, were filmed very well. Also, 5 extra stars for being the movie that created the iconic Baby Elephant Walk song. Safety Not Guaranteed, directed by Colin Trevorrow. A rom-com about time travel starring Aubrey Plaza, Mark Duplass, and Jake Johnson. Literally say nothing else, you had me at time travel. Speaking of time travel, it was fun to watch a movie about that subject that focused on the reason you should go back and not the logistics of why you shouldn't. Adam Age Vampire, directed by Anton Giulio Maiano. Not quite a ripoff of other more famous horror movies, so we'll just say tasteful homage. The monster looked cool even though he sounded funny. It was atmospheric and had some good lighting, but this movie was a joke from the start. Tunnel, directed by Kim Song-hoon. An anxiety-filled 2 hours of watching a man somehow survive being buried in a collapsed tunnel for 35 days. The pace of this movie was tremendous compared to the slow, agonizing circumstances. This was a horrifyingly beautiful movie about the human spirit. Would absolutely watch it again. Copycat, directed by John Emile. A really good idea for a cop and killer thriller that somehow feels original. Middle-aged white women with unnecessary extensive information on serial killers will love this movie, especially the crazy ones who have a crush on Ted Bundy. You fucking weirdo. Bride of the Monster, directed by Ed Wood Jr. A total waste of celluloid, though that's expected with Ed Wood movies. Some people like the overbearing cheesiness of his movies, some people think he's the worst thing to happen to movies since Thomas Edison, and this movie didn't even have a fucking monster in it, so this one is a hard pass. Peter Pan, directed by Vincent J. Donahue. This TV movie is a remake of a remake of a remake of a remake that would go on to be remade again. But don't get it twisted, this colorized version from 1960 is the best of the bunch. I used to watch this as a kid non-stop. Mary Martin is the best Peter Pan. Mystic River, directed by Clint Eastwood. I thought the subject matter of the story was handled oddly, like not emotionally enough or something. I don't know. The performances from everyone around, especially Sean Penn, were phenomenal though, but it just felt like a weird concoction of drama and thriller and romance. Silent Night, Bloody Night, directed by Theodore Gershuni. A Black Christmas ripoff with very good cinematography, horrible acting, and a downright confusing plot with a ridiculous ending that managed to destroy what little suspense it had to build up. There was a nice psycho plot twist in the middle of the movie though, but overall this whole thing was poorly executed. True Heart, directed by Catherine Siren. A fun adventure movie with rightful regard to the forest, its inhabitants, and the Native American beliefs. This movie weirdly borders on the family genre and a serious drama, so it's got a little something for everyone, especially if you like bears. I do, so I like this movie. Around the World in 80 Days, directed by Frank Coraci. Assuming it's anything like the book, which I haven't read, then this might be one of the better adaptations. I can only imagine, though, with Jules Verne's intricately and laboriously detailed writing, that the book will paint me a more vivid picture of the different cultures. Sunshine Cleaning, directed by Christine Jeffs. A wild mix of drama and a rom-com, but done very well with an interesting plot device and stellar performances from Amy Adams and Emily Blunt. You never expect to laugh about seeing blood in a rom-com and then turn around and tear up with more blood from a dramatic suicide. This movie lays everything out and asks permission to play with your emotions like a child, and you let it. It's amazing. He Went That Way, directed by Jeffrey Darling. Without a doubt, the best new movie of the year so far. The story was wild and absurd, but somehow believable and interesting. The dialogue was some of the best I've heard in a while. Both Zachary Quinto and Jacob Elordi fucking nailed every scene they were in. Stardust, directed by Matthew Vaughn. A weird and daring mix of fantasy and sci-fi plot devices that somehow doesn't come off dumb or childish. It had intriguing lore and great effects, and I think it can stand up next to the big kids. Lord of Misrule, directed by William Brent Bell. Folk horror done right. The plot of this movie is straightforward, but the execution is all over the place. Beautiful, haunting imagery, perfect casting with Ralph Ineson, but I feel like this movie's gonna be slept on, and that's not cool. Ferrari, directed by Michael Mann. A biopic with stunning cinematography that shows us an equal amount of rubber being burned and insults being hurled. Considering the subject matter, I think we got what we wanted. The Beekeeper, directed by David Ayer. Surprisingly, not just another Jason Statham beat-em-up. I mean, it is, but this movie, which borrows generously from John Wick, takes its subject matter seriously, and I think it pays off wonderfully. Also, Josh Hutcherson playing a villain is fucking gold. Finest Kind, directed by Brian Helgeland. A New England fishing story that devolves into an episode of The Sopranos. The subject material of this movie means absolutely nothing to me, but it was entertaining enough. I mean, I'll be honest, I stuck around for Jenna Ortega, and it was well worth it. Aguirre, The Wrath of God, directed by Werner Herzog. A straightforward movie with no other motive other than to showcase a group of Spanish soldiers stranded in the jungle. This was my first experience with Klaus Kinski, and I liked it. The movie seemed pointless, though. He Went That Way, directed by Jeffrey Darling. That's right, I ended up watching it again because I wanted to see it from a filmmaker point of view this time around, now that I know what's going to happen. I found it to be even better. I'm making the call right now and saying this will be on my top 10 favorites list at the end of the year. And last but not least, The Seventh Seal, directed by Ingmar Bergman. A not so serious, but simultaneously extremely deep look into the way a man handles faith. I've seen this before, and I've been dying to see it again. The cinematography speaks volumes to me. I'll be watching this more now that I found it again. Well, there you have it. That is all of the movies that I watched for the entire month of January, and I gotta say, that's quite a collection. There's a pretty good array of films for this month, if I do say so myself. I mean, you got the cheesy bullshit ones, you got the standard ones, you got the critically acclaimed ones, and then you got the artsy-fartsy ones that these snobby cinephiles like myself like to watch. My taste is all over the place when it comes to movies, which I think is a good thing. I like the fact that I have a broad view when it comes to cinema. Like, I don't just fucking, beeline straight to a certain genre or this kind of movie or whatever. I like to give everything a chance, and whether or not it's good, at least I've seen something, and maybe I'll find something from a genre that I'm not usually, watching that I enjoyed. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, let this experiment continue. I guess I'll see you next month for all the movies I watched in February. But until then, bye!